Life is so disappointing sometimes, guys. Okay, first off, hello. We're back for Web Serial Wednesday, where I read a web serial for like a couple hours, like a little audiobook podcast slash thing where I just sit here and read, and we all have a good Wednesday enjoying like someone's writing on the internet. I can't think of any better way to spend a Wednesday. Also, life is so disappointing. Because before I start reading, I'm gonna go off on a tangent. Hope no one minds. So, we have an event in our area which involves a certain dish, and basically a bunch of restaurants like add special items to their menus, and you can like order them and stuff. So we were eating a couple places this week, and for our last one, we decided to try a burger from this one restaurant, and it had a vegetables and peanut sauce, and it sounded pretty good and it was pretty affordable. So we decided to try it. Me and my like mom and sister, and it was terrible. It tasted like nothing. I didn't even taste the peanut sauce. Like, I know what peanut sauce tastes like. I love peanut sauce, but that did not taste like peanut sauce, and it was terrible. And now I'm very sad about that. That's all. I just need to mention that life is disappointing. Let's talk about something that's not disappointing, which is The Flower That Bloomed Nowhere. In our last reading 2 weeks ago, we were introduced to basically a character who seems to want to find a way around death and entropy, and she made some sort of deal with a mysterious entity to solve some kind of mystery. And then it doesn't seem she remembers her own deal, though. So it may have been like a future version of her, like an alt timeline. I don't know. But now the main character, I don't remember her name. Let's go to the previous chapter. I'm gonna check real quick. Let's see. Not Cam. That's someone else. He's a lot of I, so it's hard to find. But our main character, and basically this whole ragtag group of like talented arcanists basically are at a conference and are planning to meet with another like group to figure out like, you know, how to extend life further, kind of like stuff in that regard. And one of them even wants to like figure out how to overcome death altogether. So that's kind of the world we're dealing with here. Fighting entropy. Funny. I appreciated it. Alright, so now we got the recap out of the way. Let's start with chapter 3. I think it's chapter 3. Yeah, chapter 3. Old Reboot Academy of Medicine Healing Auditorium, 11:02 a.m. First day. Well, Cam says, rising from her seat, much as I'd love to hear you continue to crush my dreams underfoot with the force of your logic, I have someone I need to meet before we depart in a couple hours. It's 3 hours, I think. She blinked, confused for a moment, then chuckled and tapped her forehead in an "oh, I'm so silly" gesture. Of course. 2 p.m. is 3 hours after 11 a.m. She shook her head. Gosh, I know I said I had no sense of time, but that was bad even by my standards. You're probably just stressed out from the conference, I said. Not that things like that usually seem to stress you out much. Ah, Sue. Okay, that's her name, Sue. It's so sweet of you to try and comfort me, she smirked. Well, let's hope you're right. I'm all for poetic irony, but it'd be a little much if I came down with early onset dementia right after making that speech. Oh wait, I should put on my reading music. A little bit of audio in the background. And right there. Audio in the background. Yay. They do say that people in more cerebral vocations tend to see more cases, Theo said, now having returned to soaring through his luggage. Oh, eminently helpful, Theo. Extremely reassuring. Cam began sifting through a shoulder bag herself. She withdrew a circular, silver-encased and largely flat object from inside and pushed her hand against it. Then she frowned. What the? What is it? I asked. My logic engine isn't working, she said, pushing her hand against it again with a more frustrated expression. You've, Theo hesitated. You've kept it wound up, right? Yes, Theodorus, I've kept it wound up, she said, her brow flat. I'm not a child. I do understand the basic thermodynamic concept of machines requiring power to be able to function. Hey, don't get mad at me, he said, defensive. I was just trying to help. She shook the object around, tapping at it, her brow curling into a grimace. This is such a nuisance. I need this for my presentation. Maybe Lilith could fix it? I suggested, referring to the only member of our class with any expertise in machinery. Kim shook her head. She's already run off somewhere with her mother. I don't expect to be back until it's time for us to set off. She could do it on the way, couldn't she? I said. Or tonight? She considered us, but eventually clicked her tongue, shaking her head. No, I can't afford the risk. I have to go back home and pick up my spare. She sighed, but managed to bring a smile back to her face after a few moments. Well then, I suppose I better hurry off. I'll see a lot of sad sacks in a few hours. Do try to get a little excited, would you? We exchanged farewells, and she headed out through the back door of the auditorium. She's really enthusiastic about all this, Theo commented, after she'd slammed the door closed. Aren't you too? I asked. No, I am. I mean, obviously. He let out an awkward laugh, scratching the back of his head. You know I've been curious about my father's work ever since I was a boy. It's just that, well, the way she's acting, you'd think she's about to go on holiday, not to speak with a bunch of old academics. I shrugged and picked up another piece of chocolate, slowly removing the papyrus wrapping. I suppose her perspective on it is probably a little different than ours. He looked confused. How do you mean? I munched. For me, you and Lilith, we've been exposed to this stuff for half our lives. But for everyone else, I struggled to find the right wording. I think there's a special sort of excitement to something that used to be part of the cultural background become part of your personal life, so to speak. Like stepping into a painting. I swallowed. That's on top of Kamaru interest in the subject to begin with. What was her interest? I didn't actually know when I thought about it. He said, staring to the middle distance for a brief moment. I suppose. Theodorus could be a little clueless when it came to other people, especially when it came to their internal narratives. Saying that is, once again, hypocrisy. But we again differed in one notable fashion. While I reacted to the lack of intuitive understanding by indulging in neuroticism and obsessively speculating about the thoughts of others, Theo just kinda didn't bother most of the time, content to not really understand them. It frustrated some, but I was used to it. My relationship with Theo was complicated, in one sense. I'd known him longer than anyone in the entire class. We met in primary school, on account of the relationship between his father and my grandfather. For a while we'd been close friends, in the way that children are, where they just blabber to each other about things they like without any deeper substance. It was only in our teens that we began to drift apart. I still cared for him, in a vague sort of way, like the way he cared for a cousin. But I didn't know him as such. I better go for now too, he said, looking back down to his bags, a little anxious. I'm pretty sure I forgot to pack any soap. Ren looked up, raising an eyebrow. Won't they have soap there? No. That won't be any good, he said, shaking his head. It has to be this one type, or I'll get a rash. He hesitated, looking up. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it always happens. Would have thought you would have gotten a biomancer to fix an allergy like that, she said. I suppose I could, he said, scratching his head. It goes against my upbringing, though. I don't know if it would feel right. It's sort of funny for you being saying that, Ran, I said, since you're always refusing to get your lactose intolerance corrected. That's different, she says dismissively. I don't even like milk, so there's no point. It'd make it easier to eat out. I hate eating out, she replied flatly. Anyway, Theo interjected. I'll see you later, Utsu. And you, Ran. Bye, Theo, I said, holding up a hand in a small wave. He headed out the door too, leaving us alone. For about 2 minutes afterwards, we sat in silence. The last of the lingering voices of the auditorium guests had faded, so all that remained was the beat of the rain and a distant but omnipresent sound of the city. Movement, people, machines. I finished the chocolate bar I was eating and tossed the papyrus aside. I looked at the little table, considering another. "You're getting through a lot of those," Rand remarked. "Yeah, I guess so," I said, and then, "How's the book?" "Not great," she said. "I'm saving a better one from a series I like for when we're out there, since there'll be nothing to do." "That's smart," I said. She snorted. "Thanks." Then, after a pause, "You have anything you want to do until it's time?" I thought about it, and shook my head. "No, I don't think so." "You want to get some lunch?" I blinked, surprised. This was rare for Ran. Like she said a moment ago, she hated eating out. But, well, this was a special day for us, wasn't it? In a fucked up sense. "Sure," I said. "What do you mean a fucked up sense?" City of Oldiru, Upper Plaza. 20 minutes later. Once, before the final days of the Iron Epoch and the collapse that followed, the old world had orbited a local star referred to as the Sun. A massive ball of plasma fueled by the hydrogen fusion process spat out of a molecular cloud at some point in the foggy, distant past of the universe. It had become a major part of the cosmological miracle that had given birth to life, and later, the cosmological disaster called the human race. Like the majority of land-based life, mankind had evolved to depend upon the sun in a variety of ways, both as a mechanism to regulate behavior, sleep patterns, and as an agent to assist actively in biological processes, most notably the conversion of cholesterol into corticosteroids via cooking them on the skin with ultraviolet radiation. As a result, relishing in the sunlight became, to an extent, a desirable trait in the psyche, becoming deeply embedded in the reptilian parts of the mind. This character is a she is a person. These are very normal thoughts to have at the sun, obviously. The great lamp, created by the last of the ironworkers during the construction of the Mimikos, the highest point of the remaining world, and the primary home of humanity, has thusly been built to emulate the sun in not only function, but aesthetics and perceived behavior. It crossed the firmament over the course of the day, traveling from the east into the west. The pathway it took even changed with the seasons, as it had an old world based on the axial tilt of the planet. But the human brain is an observant, fussy thing, and some brains are even more observant and fussy than others. And inevitably, in some individuals. A small part of them remained aware that it wasn't quite right, producing an uncomfortable dissonance that had at this point become a widely recognized phenomenon. I understood there were even groups that helped treat it. You go on nice trips to the park and to the seaside in broad daylight during summertime to help you form happy memories associated with the lamplight. This is a concept that seemed nightmarishly satire and dystopian to me. That's neither here nor there. Because I'm the type of person that likes to rationalize and pathologize everything, I'd always assumed this is the reason I preferred nighttime and rainy days to clear daylight. Although it might have just been because I'm naturally a gloomy person. Either way, as Ren and I walked down the high street outside the university, I found myself feeling surprisingly calm and lighthearted. She'd already packed her umbrella, so we were both huddled under mine as we made our way down the street. I feel okay," I said, without prompting. "Yeah?" I nodded. "Yeah." She nodded, and turned and made the kind of tired, bittersweet expression that you might see on someone who had just been told that a pet, stricken with crippling illness for months, had finally passed on. It wasn't quite the reaction I hoped to provoke, but I'd take it. She was pathetic. Oh my god. Someone has to say it. She's pathetic, but like in an endearing way. And like you are like a sad little sick puppy who is so wet and shaking and miserable all the time. We walked through the busy crowds. The streets, shadowed by the hanging gardens and the experimental architecture of sparkling glass and bronze towers in the city center, were dense with people even at this time of day. There were even some putting up decorations for the upcoming parade. Mostly banners strung between the buildings. They were pale aquamarine, hyacinths purple, and black, the city colors of Old Yeru. If I remembered right, the parade was to pass through this area last, convening at a plaza a little below, so this would be a very busy area at the end of the weekend. Not that we'd be there to see it. Everyone, without exception, was clad in veils or the occasional mask. Most of them were variants of the standard style, like ours. Long black, they also saw some blues, purples, and even the occasional cheerful color. Men's were usually subtly less frilly and flamboyant, and were often a little shorter. Even though this was technically dangerous and could get you in trouble if it wasn't tied up properly. Most everyone wore gloves, too, though this technically wasn't part of the law. People worried, though. There tended to be a cycle. The public would get progressively more laissez-faire about covering their faces, until eventually there'd be a high-profile prosthetic event or contact paradox, which would spook everyone enough to start the cycle over. I've seen it play out, subtly, about 3 or 4 times over the course of my life. What the hell is a contact paradox? That's human nature, I suppose. It's easy to forget something is a threat until it's actively killing someone. How does that kill people? I'm so fascinated by the magic system here. Oh yeah, seeing people's faces, that will kill you. I saw a news sheet that had blown out into the middle of the street, heavily trimmed and soggy. The headline read, in over-the-top bold print, "Alliance celebrates 200 years of world peace." I looked over to Ran, so much as you can really look over at someone when you can't see others' faces. "You said we're gonna miss the parade?" I asked, speaking up a bit over the rain in the crowd. "What?" she asked incredulously. "Fuck no." "Really?" "Yeah," she said. "Come on, you know I hate those things." "You used to love the ones I did back when we were kids. You even dragged me with you the year we met." "Yeah, because I was a little idiot who didn't know about politics yet," she said, rolling her eyes. "If I would watch old people jack themselves off for hours, I could think of plenty of ways to do it that wouldn't involve wasting 3 lecture debt." I snorted, breaking out of laughter for a second. "Geez, Ran." "Besides," she continued, "it doesn't even make sense to be having it. We haven't had 200 years of world peace. Everyone was shooting at each other barely more than a decade ago. Hell, my dad got half his face blown off to prove it." "I mean, I can't stop doing it now," I said, playing devil's advocate. "It's tradition." "Yeah, and it's tradition to celebrate people's birthday, but it's still fucking weird if you throw a party for them after they're already 6 feet under." "Well, you know what the council says," I said. "It wasn't a proper war. Everyone was following the rules. Nobody broke the treaty or the covenant. It was just a misunderstanding that got really out of hand." What a load of horseshit. "God, the world's such a mess," she said, rubbing her eyes. "I hate politics." "Politics is like a lump in your armpit," I said. "You don't want to look at it, but if you don't, it might get a whole lot worse while you're not paying attention." "Oh, like a cancer analogy, she said dryly. "How on topic for today." I laughed a little to myself. "What about you then?" she asked. "Are you sad you're gonna miss it?" "Not really," I said, directing our walk to avoid a passing carriage. "I guess I'll be sad I don't get to see the fireworks." "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah," I nodded. "They remind me of home. A little bit." She looked at me for a moment and snorted, shaking her head. "You're such a little kid, Sue." I smiled to myself, looking downward. "I am what I am," I said quietly. "I can't be anything else. Unless..." "My name is Utsu Shikome of Fusai. That's Utsu Shikome, though most people call me Sue for short." "Oh, I got it right?" "It's an old name for Nkutui, and means something like mysterious child. But I've never looked into it deeply, since it's not modern Kutuian, and both my parents are disengaged from their cultural heritage. My mother probably took it from a novel, knowing her. I'm an acolyte healer. More specifically, my discipline is Thanatomancy, the Tharkana. The term people use since necromancer became associated with people digging the recently dead out of their graves, and then subsequently became regarded as pejorative. I must have been pretty good at it, since I'd been accepted into one of the more prestigious training courses for healers in the world. Something which still felt very strange when I thought about it. After my grandfather died, I drifted away from many of my friends and found myself studying more and more often. Soon, it was all I did with my time. I'd always been clever, but pretty soon people started talking to me like I was some sort of genius. I skipped some years, managed to get an apprenticeship under a famous scholar in Mekhi, and soon I'd ended up where I was. I'm not trying to sound too pleased with myself. In truth, I'm really a shockingly immature person, more of an idiot savant than a genius. I don't have any life skills or much in the way of interesting hobbies. I've left my own devices and not given something clear to do. I just spend all my time reading. I won't say you wouldn't be able to find a more boring person than me, but it might at least take you a minute. All that is true, especially the part about me being shockingly immature. But it's also not the whole truth. There's two things you want to understand about me before we get into the meat of this. The first is that I'm a tremendous coward. Sometimes I'm a coward in a straightforward way, like I was being back in the carriage with Ran, though you won't fully understand the extent of that cowardice for quite a while. Other times, more dangerously, I'm the sort of coward that frames their cowardice as logical or rational, and sometimes manage to convince even myself. Second is that, for as big a coward I am, I'm an even bigger liar. On that day, that busy Friday in the late spring, I'd already lied, though primarily by omniscient, quite a lot. Because, if you haven't inferred already, I had an ulterior motive for attending the event with the Order of the Universal Panacea. Well, maybe that's the wrong way to put it. It was more like a miracle had happened, and a chance I'd been seeking for a long, long time had fallen right into my lap. It was said that the Order were the greatest healers in the remaining world, and I, after a fashion, had an ailment that needed to be treated. Even if it required me to overcome my cowardice and finally do something selfless, regardless of the consequences to myself. That's a funny feeling. Sort of like back in the carriage. Almost like I'm repeating myself? She definitely does not remember that stuff. There's something else going on with you are not boring and average. That is what every protagonist says, and that's never true. I'll have to see about that. Wagged my finger. God, these fucking ads are... What is this ad? This is not making me want to click on it. No offense to RPG enjoyers, but I'm not one of those people. I have to kind of point sometimes to ads and go, huh, look at that. Anyways. Old-Iru, Upper Plaza, back streets. 11:47 a.m. first day. The modern world wasn't that terrible, really. For its faults, mankind is pretty tenacious. After the collapse of the old world and construction of the Mimikos as a somewhat inferior replacement, many people had believed that civilization would never recover, but surprisingly quickly, it did. And after that, people said the quality of life of the Imperial era, the Golden Age which had preceded the collapse, would never come again. But it had too, more or less. Because humans are inherently awful, all ages of peace and prosperity must be understood as the product of miracles. We have a very opinionated main character here. And a miracle had, after a fashion, happened. Hope you know that, like, out of the corner of my eye, I keep seeing my laptop being like, hey, do you want to install the Windows update? Do you want to install it? And I'm like, no, every single time. I'm busy. Let's see. 2 centuries ago, a combination of out-of-context threat from the lower planes destabilizing the political status quo and forcing the world to unite, combined with timely advances in technology and the power which the contemporary powerful were too preoccupied to figure out how to approach, had been that miracle. It produced a rare social alchemy. People were hopeful, but not unpragmatic. Educated, but not overly cautious. Angry, but not in such a way that marred critical thinking. That era had seen the foundation of the Grand Alliance of the Morning Realms, the body which now governed over 80% of humanity. And it was usually just. if you didn't squint too much. Among many other things, its inception had removed most barriers to training as an arcanist, which, alongside a revolution in replication arcana, had all but brought the end to the concept of scarcity, with most day-to-day items so trivially produced that they were effectively valueless, transcending the traditional economy. Medical applications of the power, too, advanced, growing far more widespread and granting lifespans that were previously only attainable by the privileged to the entire population. On the surface, everything was good. Life was abundant, food was abundant, entertainment was abundant. For most people, that was enough. Not least of all the people of the elder generations, who were always eager to remind people like me how we didn't know how good we had it in a typical old person fashion. And it was probably true to an extent. Still, recently, there was a sense that things were slowly taking a turn for the worse. Small crises kept occurring, the effects compounding successively on one another. For the first time in many years, the sense of stability into the world had vanished, and I think at the back of everyone's mind there was an increasing understanding that something foundational had begun to break. Societal catastrophe is like losing at chess. You could see it coming 5 turns in advance, but too much was in motion to stop it. I'd been a child during the Eco-Ionic Revolution. Back then, one of the reasons I'd first thought about becoming a healer, prior to my more complex present-day motives, was to help people, to play part in setting things right. I smiled at the thought of those better, simpler days. "Here's your food," the waitress said with a warm smile, setting the plates down in front of us. "Thanks," Rand said. "Thank you," I said. "Let me know if there's anything else I can get for you," she said cheerily, before heading back behind the counter. Outside, the rain began to pick up considerably. There'd be a storm this evening, though we wouldn't be here to see it. Finding a good cafe is something of an art. It's not as easy as simply locating a place that serves good food, with good service, at a good location. Any idiot can do that. The trouble is that mere goodness inevitably attracts ever larger crowds, which is ruinous for a multitude of reasons that I hopefully don't need to elaborate on here. So what one seeks is not perfection, but rather a careful balance. A mix of positive traits you value highly, and negative ones you personally don't, but will nevertheless serve to put off a sufficient percentage of random individuals. It had taken a while, but I eventually found a place that struck that sweet spot within walking distance of the academy. It was kind of difficult to reach, tucked away in an alley on a small side street, itself several turns away from the boulevard, and hemmed in on all sides by towering estates, storefronts, and offices. Not much light reached it, even around noon, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere. They're examples of qualities which would put off ordinary people. Fortunately, I was a freak who would probably live in a cave if I could, so it didn't bother me. Besides, the interior was much nicer, with a rustic, country inn-style aesthetic. Big tables up against the windows, thick wooden rafters, a semi-open kitchen that let the smell of baking bread waft freely over the room. The food was only a little bit better than average, but they'd given themselves a lower than average grade in the service index for the city, so most meals only cost a single luxury debt or two. Not that the price was much of a concern. We were arcanists. We both had a decent amount of regular debt relief. But Rand, at least, was still thrifty. Most importantly, though, almost no one from the academy went to it, which made it a near surefire bet that I wouldn't be bothered by other students. Today, it was about half empty, and we were seated near the door, not far from the front counter. Rand had ordered a medium-sized dish of shakushka, egg poached in soup of tomatoes and peppers, while I was making my way through a couple of cheese and lamb stuffed flatbreads, grilled, brittle, and crunchy. The meat within was prime loin. I'd heard that in the past, shoulder meat was used for the dish, but in the modern day, only the most desirable cuts were still widely replicated. "This isn't too bad," Rand said, without much enthusiasm. "Kinda greasy, though." Some of their stuff can be that way," I replied, my mouth half full. "I think the less complicated things they do are better. I really like stuffed bread. The wraps aren't bad either." I was hoping for something a little more substantial than a glorified sandwich, she said. to know what kind of food they're going to be serving at this thing. I doubt it would be bad, I reassured her. They're supposed to have their own chef. She nodded, silently. I sipped the tea I'd ordered between bites. I miss Sauk food, she said, after a minute or so had gone by, idly pushing an egg around with her fork. I swear, this Yastaran stuff is going to kill me if I live here for another couple of years. If you think this is fattening, you should try living in Mekhi, I said with a small smile, referring to where I'd gone to university. Yeah, I've heard the stories. She stuffed the egg in her mouth, chewed for a few moments, and swallowed. I remember how chubby you were when I went and visited. I let out an awkward laugh. I'm not sure I'd ever heard anyone refer to me as chubby before. Well, I mean, compared to when we were kids, she said. Normal versus looking like you're starving yourself. I'm not that bad, am I? It's not your fault, she said, and then muttered. You've always been that way, I guess. Even when, well, you know. I nodded distantly, looking away for a moment. The relationship that I had with Rin was old and complicated. The subject, which would become increasingly difficult to avoid as the weekend went on, was hanging over both our heads like the blade of a guillotine, and we appeared to have established an unspoken pact to not talk about it until it needed to be talked about. But the problem is that when something is a big enough deal, you can't help brushing up against it no matter how much you try to avoid doing so. 1 second. Here we go. That was a completely different screen. We're back. Sorry, I had a minor interruption. But we are back to reading. There we go. Where were we? There it is. We were right here. But the problem is that when something is a big enough deal, you can't help brushing up against it no matter how much you try to avoid doing so. And when that happens, the only choices are to either break the pact, offer some feeble attempt at meta commentary on the awkwardness to break the ice and end up breaking the pact anyway, or to just suffer the uncomfortable moment for a few seconds before trying to change the subject. Like I said a minute ago, sorry for the loud printer noise in the background, if you could hear that. I'm not sure how loud it is. Okay, I guess it's not that loud, so I'll just keep talking. There we go. Like I said a minute ago, I'm a coward, so the last one was naturally the most appealing. But of course, the trouble is that the more times you did it, the louder it would be when the other shoe finally hit the floor. What was the food like when you lived in the Arcanocracy? I asked, changing the topic to something as unrelated as contextually possible. Kind of blander than in the league, she said. Healthy though. And they dress it up a lot. Dress it up? Like in big fancy displays, she said, gesturing outwardly. Really carefully arranged. Either look like something, like a painting, or a different type of food, or just be pretty and tidy. They used a lot of colored rice. Colored rice? Does it taste funny? She looked at me with the flat... Oh, sorry, 1 second. There we go. Sorry for all interruptions. My mom is just printing some stuff out and the printer's in my room, so she's coming in and being like, hey, printing this out, printing this out. There might be one more interruption. I'll see. Shouldn't be any more than like a couple minutes, a minute at worst. But yeah. They were talking about food. She looked at me with a flat expression. No, Sue, it's just food coloring. Oh, I said, lifting my flatbread and taking a bite out of it. Despite that awkwardness, it was funny how much more genuine hiccup, sorry. It was funny how much more genuine the dynamic felt when it was just her and I. Because of my demeanor and prosperity for spouting out stupid facts, in most conversations, it felt like I often ended up taking the role of the serious, sensible person, even though I didn't really mean to. Like how avocado starts looking sort of like a vegetable when you stick it alongside a bunch of sweet fruits. Rand, though, was an actually serious person, and she saw through me in a way that most people didn't. So it was just the two of us. Things flipped, and I felt like I was allowed to be immature. It made me happy. At the same time, though, I was also putting on more of a performance when we spoke than with anyone else. A performance of the role I'd taken on for my half of our shared quest. Was it more authentic or less to lie about one really big thing rather than a bunch of small ones? A question for the philosophers. They have this idea in Inner Sao that you could change how things taste based on how they look, she went on, spitting more of her own lunch into her mouth. The ocular tongue, as best as I can translate it. So even if you're eating something hyper healthy, you could be tricked into thinking it's tasty if it's dressed up to resemble something indulgent. Something I could believe is true, I said. Does it work? Sort of. In my second year, I could have sworn everything red started to taste a little like meat. Either way, though, it's totally dominant over there. There's a whole language to how they prepare the food, what color or style means and what turns into nutrition, ingredients, all that stuff. What happens if you're colorblind? She shrugged. You're fucked, presumably. She took a few gulps from her glass of water. I bet there aren't a lot of people who are, though. The state healers do even trivial stuff for free, from birth to deathbed. I suppose that makes sense, I said, nodding. I mean, they're really into the whole noblesse oblige stuff over there. You're telling me, she said, setting the glass back down. It's still weird not having to take community guardianship lessons at the end of every week. Shit's burned into my brain. All the citizens which with you entrusted are to be as your own children, to be afforded the same compassion, the same love. Kinda creepy, I said flatly. Well, we're foreigners used to Arcanists being treated like anybody else, she said. Hard to see across a cultural gulf like that. I guess so, I said, taking another bite. Didn't know you were planning on staying in the country, though. You think they wouldn't want to waste his resources? I told them, but they seemed convinced they could make me stay, she said, swirling her spoon around her soup. They acted that way with all the international kids, talking about the special place I get to occupy compared to anywhere else, all the benefits. Fuck, I might have considered it if it weren't for... She gestured her hand around. You know, all this. Yeah, I said, weakly, then furrowed my brow. You might have considered it? Is it that surprising? She snorted. You think I'm immune to the appeal of getting treated like royalty? I mean, it does seem like the kind of thing that makes you uncomfortable, I admitted. You never really like being in charge of anything during class assignments or leading any presentations. Yeah, because responsibility for no benefit is a pain in the ass, she said, glancing out the window for a moment. But it's just human to like power. Who wouldn't run the world if they offered you the job? You had a chance to try and fix this fucking mess. I wouldn't, I retorted, box shivering. It would be way too stressful. Uh-huh, she hummed skeptically. Plus, I'd be really bad at it, I continued. I'd probably get a bunch of people killed. If you're a dictator, that's just called keeping you on your toes, Rand replied flatly, sipping from her spoon. Like most of the students of the exemplary acolytes class, the two of us were foreigners rather than natives to Old Yaru, or its region of Greater Ysara, invited because of our academic achievements at other institutions of higher education. We were both from Sao, to the west, though that statement is almost uselessly broad. I don't know, I said broad. I'll try to explain without an outright lecture. The original Salic party had been one of the 9, depending on your definition, groups of people who survived the collapse of the old world, Sao meaning grief in Imperial era language, and, after the completion of the Mimikos, had settled on the flatlands on the far side of the Akinesi Mountains. Generally speaking, the 6 parties which made their home in the bowl of the Mimikos fell into one of 2 categories. The first were those dominated by a single cohesive group, which transitioned almost directly into nation-states. The Ruhun Bardi, the Makihans, In contrast, the second were those divided into many disparate groups, resulting in them fragmenting into clusters of smaller states, the Yasarans, Enotians, and Baraki. The Salic party, however, had been the only one to occupy an awkward middle ground, more like it. There had been a vaguely dominant cultural group, to the point that they felt entitled to claim themselves as the rightful leaders of Salic civilization, but also a sizable amount of people who weren't part of said group, enough that they wouldn't fall in line behind the government and the party leaders end up forming. As a result, the regional identity ended up messy. Ren and I were from the Dai League, a federation of small states around the mountains, which had been the biggest group that had political history code for only involving a couple of lords, decided not to be under the authority of the government. Said government had become the Salic Federation, which after the Tricentennial War had reorganized into the Salic Arcanocracy, the last state in the world still governed by Arcanists. So we're a Salic, but not part of the Salic nation, if that made sense. We did have someone in our class from the Arcanocracy, but, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. They ever try to poach you over in Meki? She asked, taking a sip of her drink. I shook my head. I don't think they do that kind of thing over there much. I lifted up some melted cheese and awkwardly flipped it up to the side of the bread. There was a lot of moments of cultural shock. They spent a lot of time drilling in how being an Arcanist, or even being smart, doesn't make you special. That's just a role, and you shouldn't be conceited, no matter how hard you work. That figures, she said. Probably the mature way to look at it. Nobody's special just because they can float things around and shoot fire out of a stick. Yeah, I glanced to the side. Kind of bruised my ego, though. You don't realize how much you're dependent on praise to keep going until it's gone. She raised an eyebrow along her spoon. You must be loving this place, then. I giggled awkwardly, my face going a little flushed. A half-minute or so passed in silence. We both finished off the greater part of our food now. Feels surreal, she said suddenly, in a more distant tone. That we're finally doing this, I mean. Ah, I thought. There goes the pact, then. I said nothing, staring down at my food. It's kind of funny, she continued, despite my lack of response. I got so used to all of this that when I got the news that we'd been invited to this conclave, my first reaction was being annoyed. I was thinking, shit, I'm really struggling to keep my grades up to the standard. Now they want me to spend weeks preparing to perform for a pack of old hermits? She snorted. Completely forgotten the reason I'd spent so much time getting to this stupid class to begin with. I remained silent. When I read you a letter back then, I almost jumped out of my seat. Probably made an ass of myself in the middle of the lecture hall. She shook her head. The gods have a hell of a sense of humor. You spend years trying to get something, and then they dump it right on your doorstep. Probably the first damn place you look, too. Can't even remember at this point. Years. When she said explicitly, it really did sound insane. We'd spent so long to pursue this opportunity. Now that it's finally here, all I could do was fret about it. Be anxious about success, while still dreading the possibility this last spark of hope that I'd been so long chasing would be decisively snuffed out. What matters is that you try, I tried telling myself. That you do everything you can. Come on, I said, trying to sound upbeat. You can't say this was worth it in of itself, too, right? You're going to be one of the most qualified graduating Arcanists in the world in a couple of years. I smiled a bit. You could get tenure anywhere, work for the Alliance Administration, join the Sibyls. I'd rather still be at home, working at the library. Something boring, she said, shaking her head. This stuff isn't for me. I'll never fit in. I opened my mouth to protest, but then hesitated and stopped, falling silent for a few moments. I got the news when I was at my parents' house, I said, changing course. 2 days after I got into Oriskios for my visit. I laughed stiffly, looking downward. Ruined the whole thing. Couldn't think about anything else, barely talk to anyone else. That's rough, Ren said, cutting off a piece of egg. Yeah, I said. Couldn't even enjoy it when my mother dragged me to the spring festival. Kept having peculiar thoughts. I hesitated. You mind if I go on a stupid tangent for a minute? She snorted. It's never stopped you before. I took another bite, saving it a bit now that it was almost gone. Despite my reassurance to Savannah earlier, I was not, in fact, completely confident that there would be decent food at the conclave, so I wanted to make sure I was reasonably full. You remember the tram station where we used to meet whenever we went to class? She thought about it for a second. On Hierarch's Way, you mean? Yeah, I said, gesturing to her affirmatively. That one. My mom and I took the line to get in town for the festival, and it was completely different. They'd ripped the whole platform out and built it up again as something bigger and more modern looking. Round with huge glass windows. It's practically swallowed the whole street. Makes sense, she said. That part of town's been booming ever since they started building up the bay back when we were kids. I nodded. Yeah, I guess. I scrunched up my brow. But after I saw that, for a while, I felt really messed up. She raised an eyebrow. Messed up? Yeah, I said, looking away as I let out an awkward, embarrassed laugh. Couldn't calm down for hours. I think I might even cried a bit. What? She said, looking a little incredulous. Just over a street fixture being remodeled? Like I said, it's stupid. I was in a stupid mood. I lifted my hair out of the way and scratched at the side of my head. It just felt dissonant in a way that really struck me. Rather, how should I put it? I bit my lip. I never thought about it, but I had all these memories of being there, sitting at all the different spots. The lamppost near the entrance, the wooden wall at the back where there'd always be posters for plays or advertisements for some shop or another. I even remembered the shape of some of the tiles on the ground. God, Sue, she interrupted, shaking her head. You're so sentimental. I think it's close to becoming a health problem. And I remembered being with you. And all the stuff we talked about then, just after we'd met. And in the 2 years after that, and everything that happened during that time. All those important moments, tied back to that one place, linked together like the middle of a spider's web. Her expression became a little more serious, and she sighed, nodding a bit. I ran my spoon in circles around the inside of my teacup, the liquid swirling. But when I saw how it changed, it was almost like I'd lost them after a fashion. Not before, they'd be grounded in a real part of the world, etched into something concrete that would always be there for me. With that gone, it was almost like they'd been overwritten, invalidated, like someone had crossed out that whole section of my life story. You mean, because there isn't any proof you didn't just make it all up? Sort of, I said, hesitantly. It was more abstract than that. Like the world within myself had become disconnected from the one I had to live in, and I'd slipped into a parallel dimension. When I focused on it, it felt as though I was losing something, like it was being taken from me. She scoffed, shaking her head. I frowned. You don't get it? It's not that like I don't get it, she said. It's just... that's normal, isn't it? She sipped from her drink. The world changes, you don't. Stuff from your childhood disappears. It hurts. Life sucks. Life sucks, I repeated, quieter. But I can't imagine anyone other than you intellectualizing it so much, she said. It's just something people have to get over. Oh, you know me, I said, shrugging. I'm always overthinking things. Another few moments passed. I'd finished eating, so I just stared at the slowly solidifying droplets of melted cheese that had managed to escape from my flatbread during the consumption process, like blood from a dying animal. I picked at one of them with my fork idly. My grandfather once said, her eyebrows jolted up, that the human heart is like a bowl with a little crack in the bottom, so that water is always leaking out, and you have to keep pouring more and more in to try and make up for it. My eyes wandered towards the window. No matter what you do in life, you're always losing things, either explicitly or in abstract. And the only way to make up for it is to keep adding new things. Because if you're not careful, you won't be able to keep up. And before you know it, you'll have nothing at all. And then you'll be out of luck for good. The atmosphere suddenly became extremely awkward. She seemed unsure of the appropriate thing to say, and broke eye contact for a moment. I don't know why it sticks in my mind so much, I said. Like granddaughter, like grandfather, I guess. I made a grim smile, looking downward. Or, well, whatever you'd call our relation to each other. Nice work, my sense of social consciousness said. Now you've made this as weird as it can possibly get. Eventually, Rand cleared her throat. I don't think you're like that old man, Sue. Are you sure about that? I asked, with a grim smile. Yeah, she said, firmly, nodding. For one thing. Hey! A recognizable voice interjected off on the left, near the door of the cafe. You too! Rand stopped and sharply turned her head in the direction of the interjection, while I physically jumped in my seat a bit. The personal nature of the conversation stripped away violently. Sprinting over to her table was a young woman with a medium brown complexion. Flat black hair cut the pixie length, and bright green eyes that contrasted sharp, elegant facial features. She was dressed in a vibrant colored green, knee-length chiton and a brown cloak. It was not remotely suitable for the clothing for the weather, and this was evident in the fact that, despite having an umbrella, she was pretty wet. Not that she seemed to care much. She was grinning, but also panting a bit. It looked like she'd been running. Phew, she said, whipping her brow as she came to stop beside us. I finally found you! Ptolema? I said, thrown off. What are you doing here? Looking for you, obviously, she said, still huffing and puffing. It was really tough. What are you even doing in a place like this? I gestured to the table. Eating lunch? She looked at the table, then back to me. Well, yeah, duh. I meant, why are you in such a shady place? I almost gave up and went to get a map. And there's not even a proper sign in the front door. Don't look at me, Rand said. Her face was flushed a bit, and she turned her attention back to finishing her food. She picked. Hey, come on, you said it wasn't that bad. It isn't, she replied. If it were my own, I would have gone somewhere less fucking weird. I clicked my tongue, looking back to Ptolema. How did you find us, anyway? Theo told me, she said, grinning. I asked where you might be, and he said he didn't know, but that you sometimes went to this gloomy place at few streets around the back of the clothing store, and he gave me some directions. My eye twitched slightly. That traitor. That sniveling little rat. Now everyone will know about it. They're kind of crappy, though, but I figured it out eventually, she said, looking thoughtful. Geez, though. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were trying to hide from people here. I made an effort not to contort my face into an expression of distaste. Rand appeared to notice, looking subtly amused. This noisy, enthusiastic girl is Ptolema. Okay. Ptolema, if Bradley Antonian of Reeds, another student from our class. Ptolema was another member of the class who I'd known prior to joining. Although unlike Rand and Theo, we'd only ever been very loose acquaintances, having occasionally met due to our families, and at one point during a summer study course we'd both taken. And for not incomprehensible reasons, since we're basically polar opposites in every regard. She was outgoing, I was introverted. She was an optimist, I was a pessimist. She was athletic, while I was constantly in a state of physical atrophy so severe that it was a miracle of the modern world that I could walk down the street without collapsing. Sue does not lift, unfortunately. Of all the members in this class, of the class, Ptolema was perhaps the greatest enigma to me. Enigma. I'm sorry. I have weird word pronunciations. Not because she was a particularly mysterious person. If anything, the opposite was the case. But rather because it seemed unclear to me how she was in the class to begin with. Her vocation was arcane surgery, which wasn't exactly a discipline of the powers so much as a rare method of employing it. Carving runes and enchantments into people's physical bodies. By all accounts, she was very good at it. She had an incredibly steady and precise hand. But I don't know quite how to put this in a way that won't make me sound incredibly full of myself, but Tolma was not exactly someone who came across as much of an intellectual. I could picture her scores for practical work being amazing. When I tried to reconcile my conception of her and her overall apparent knowledge with the written exams we took with regularity, it was a little difficult. My only guesses were that either she was putting on a front and was shockingly good at it, or somehow coasting through on pure nepotism. She came from probably the most prestigious background in the group, so the latter seemed more likely. Or, you know, perhaps I'm just an elitist who can't conceive of someone who isn't full of themselves being smart. Draw your own conclusions. So, I said, what did you need anyway? Oh, right. She pulled herself together. Actually, I was supposed to get both you and Ram. Ren looked up, a little wary. What for? The class coordinator asked me, since everyone else ran off after the presentation thing. He said he needs some help with some class files the Conclave requested or something. She frowned. Files? Tolma nodded enthusiastically, as if the two of them had come to some important understanding. Yeah, like records of all the past stuff we've done, test results, that kind of thing. They want a copy of it as one of their conditions, I think, so the archivists wouldn't pre-printed everything. What does that have to do with me? Ren asked. Dunno. Tolma held her arms together, rubbing them with her hands. Now she was stationary, the cold appeared to be catching up to her. I think they screwed something up. I didn't get all the details, but he said that only you could help with it. She sighed a bit, rubbing her eyes. Fine, I can deal with that. What about for me? I asked. I'm not sure about that either. I think I just wanted to talk. Something about a favor? She scratched the back of her neck. There was more, but I think it slipped out of my head while I was running around. I thought about sending something snarky, like, you know, Tolma, they have this thing called parchment that I hear is popular. And so I was genuinely a little annoyed that we'd been interrupted. But you're not supposed to shoot the messenger, even if the messenger is a little crappy at their job, so I bit my tongue. Well, it's okay, I guess, I said. So where does he want us? At his office off the grounds, she said. But you don't have to go right away or anything. You can finish eating or talking or whatever. I just wanted to find you before you went someplace else. We're almost done already, Ren said. Unless you were going to order dessert, Sue? No, it's okay, I said. I don't want us to end up rushing too much if this ends up being complicated. Ah, jeez, Tolma said, frowning. Now I feel like kind of a jerk. If I'd been less dumb, you might have known if you had more time. It's not your fault, Tolma, I said, standing up. Everyone's stressed out, right? We paid, put our veils back up, punched our seed numbers into the auto-lock mechanism at the door, and left. Alright, next chapter. Chapter 5. Scrolling past all the weird advertisement. Old Yuru Upper Plaza, back streets, 12:09 p.m. As we stepped outside into the rain, I withdrew my scepter. They were long, slightly bulky rods over a little half the length of one's arm, just about small enough to carry around on your waist. I paused for a moment to concentrate, did the math in my head, then carefully spoke the words of the incantation as I held it aloft. Entropy denying. The power, at its core, was simple. It was capable of doing three fundamental things: moving particles, gathering information about particles, and performing math. In order to manipulate it, the caster used an incantation, a series of mathematical and conceptual instructions drawn from a dead language, always starting with the initiating word. A star thing, meaning divinity, ending with the terminating word. Circle thing, meaning totality, in either verbal or written form to dictate what actions it should perform, and our unconscious mind to determine the target. Eris, the academy term for energy in an arcane context, was consumed proportionately to the difficulty of the task, and had to be allocated properly to avoid the incantation failing, or the energy discharging in a violent backlash. Finally, it had a range of about 10 meters. From those basic principles, over the past 14 centuries, an incredibly complicated framework of conceits had sprung. Scepters to store Eris, runes to partially pre-complete incantations that required as little as the initiating and terminating words, and a litany of disciplines that built math upon math to accomplish increasingly complex and specific tasks. In the present day, it was generally agreed that they numbered 12: pyromancy, aethomancy, geomancy, radiomancy, biomancy, thanatomancy, chronomancy, goemancy, mantomancy, neuromancy, divination, and transmutation. There was also the defunct discipline of egomancy, and the three applicational facito disciplines of alchemy, rune scripting, and arcane engineering. That's a lot of mancies. And all these in turn had more schools than he could shake his stick at, which themselves had their own sub-schools, and, well, you get the idea. Thanatomancy, my discipline, was divided into 3 major schools: traditional, transformative, and entropic, based on their approach to death as a phenomena. Traditional Thanatomancers saw it as simply a life form, from a single-celled organism to something as broad as a forest, ceasing to function, and most of their methods were based around restoring that functionality without trying to actually restore the life. Skeletons clawing themselves out of the ground is the prototypical image, which the colleagues and even the Machian government had expended so much effort in recent centuries trying to excise from the public consciousness. Not that it had done them much good. Bunch of glorified grave robbers. On the other hand, transformative Thanatomancers almost rejected the concept of death completely, seeing it instead as, well, a transformation, like life shifting in nature and being simplified, but not per se destroyed. The focus of their incantations and research were much closer to the biomancy than other schools, using living and dead tissue in tandem. Finally, entropic Thanatomancy conceived of death as a process that applied not just to living beings, but in broader strokes, to the loss of anything in reality. The flame going out was just as much a death as a bug being squished, and that mindset was the only truly reasonable one for preserving that order. It flirted with aethermomancy, the study of using the power to manipulate physics. I was an entropic Thanatomancer, with the incantation I just used being one of the signature techniques, though this application of it was pretty primitive. The symbol of the school was an inverted ankh, which crowned the head of my scepter. As I finished speaking, a peculiar half-bubble of force began to form over our heads, where the rain came to a very abrupt stop. The individual droplets not exactly repelled, rather appearing to give up their descent in mid-fall. They hung overhead, coalescing into each other the longer we remained unmoving. "It seems kind of frivolous," Rand said, over the increasingly loud winds, looking up at the result with her arms crossed. "What?" "I said that it seems like a waste of Eris," she rephrased, louder. "Oh. I suppose so," I said, putting my scepter back into my bag. "But it's fine, isn't it? There'll be time to recharge it later." "Phew, this is great!" Tolma held out the palms of her hands to both sides of her, as if to marvel at their lack of wetness. "I thought I was going to have to get soaked again just as I was starting to dry off." "Don't you know the Matter Suspending Arcana, Tolma?" Rand asked. "Well, yeah, but only for, like, stopping bleeding and holding stuff like muscle tissue apart," she said. "I couldn't do the math for something like this on the spot. You're amazing, Sue." "It's not really that difficult," I said, secretly thrilled. I loved compliments, even when it came from Tolma's from the Tolmas of the world. I only had to learn it once, and I just adjust the values by a simple metric based on the angle and severity of the downpour. Could you stop the wind, too? I shook my head. To do that, it'd have to encircle us completely. And then if anyone got too close, the resistances would break the enchantment. Aww. We should set off, Ren said, looking at the clock in her logic engine. If this ends up taking a while, we're going to be cutting it close already. Alright, I said, nodding. We put up our veils. Tolma's, unlike ours, was a deep green shade that sort of matched her outfit, and set off out of the alley. Since we'd been standing in one spot for a while, there was a loud thunk behind us as the built-up rainwater fell to the paved stones. The coroner's office was also not far from the academy, but unfortunately it was not far in the opposite direction to which we'd originally traveled to get to the cafe. We headed back down the boulevard, past one of the largest grocery distribution houses in the city, and down a set of steps to the lower level of the district, which leaned more residential. Tall, 460-story townhouses with tiled roofs dominated, with the occasional towering apartment building reaching 20 or more. The streets here were filled with plant life, to the point they were halfway to being gardens, flanking us on both sides with abundant purple and white floral displays, and tall trees on the brink of flowering for the spring. It was in weather like this that these sorts of planting choices, which had become extremely popular in the modern age, as the hyper-conservative styles of the pre-alliance and fundamentalist eras finally faded away, started to become problematic. Despite being separated from the walking area by little stone barriers about a quarter of a foot tall, mud had begun to spill over and through the cracks onto the street. That was the risk of making things pretty rather than practical. It only worked so long as the rest of the world stayed compliant. Some people were gawking at us a bit on the account of the unconventional barrier I put up. Enchantments to physically shield people from rain in a fashion akin to a glorified umbrella were common enough, but this was a bit rarer. It was making me sort of regret it. I didn't like being stared at. I struck up a frivolous conversation to distract myself. Hey, Ran, I said, looking to her. You know, you never really gave your opinion back when we were talking after the conference. She looked confused. About what? Immortality? Oh, right. That. She seemed disinterested, speaking flatly. I think people dying is great. I'm absolutely in favor of it. Hey, come on, I said. Be serious. I am being serious, she said, in a fashion so deadpan you can almost believe it. If everyone died, it'd be a massive improvement for the world right now. What are you guys talking about? Tolma interjected. She's talking about the pursuit of living forever, Rand said, now facing forward again. She jerked her thumb in my direction. After Cam's creepy speech, the two of them were arguing about it. Oh, she said, nodding. I didn't think it was creepy. I don't even really think about stuff like that, and it was still kind of getting me pumped up. I feel like you're pretty easily swayed by people being passionate, I said. Hell yeah, she grinned. If someone cares about something that much, well, it's gotta be worth something, right? It's certainly one way to think of it, I thought to myself. What's your opinion, Tolma? Ren asked, seemingly wanting to make someone other than herself the focus of the questioning. You think people should live forever? She considered this for a while, crossing her arms and looking pensive. Well, I guess it would be hard for everyone to live forever, right? I mean, there's only so much space in the remaining world. That issue came up in our conversation, I said, nodding. But it'd be great if people could live another few hundred years at least. Or if people didn't start getting all weird looking and crusty when they were past 400. They could stay healthy right up until the end. That'd be a big improvement. Getting old and crusty is what kills you, though, I said, echoing a sentiment Can had expressed in their conversation earlier. If you got rid of that, what would actually do them in? Huh. It seemed to throw her off for a moment, and she scratched her head. I guess I didn't really think of it that way. Maybe the best thing would be to get to where we can keep people young and healthy to 1,000, and then we made it the law, so when you get that hold, that's when you have to die? I furrowed my brow. Wouldn't that be a murder? No way, she said, shaking her head. It'd be totally fair. They could do it in a painless way, so nobody has to suffer before the end like it is right now. So everyone gets 1,000 years of good life, and then they have to step aside for the next generation. That'd be fine, wouldn't it? Why 1,000? Rand asked. It's a clean number, she explained. Feels fairer than something random like 132 years. Guess you got me there, she replied flatly. How would you kill them exactly? I asked. I don't know, Tolma said, shrugging. I guess it would be best to let him pick. They could do something romantic like jumping off a cliff in a pretty place, or something simple like being killed with the life-slaying arcana in their sleep. There's a lot of okay options, right? I stared at Tolma curiously. It was in moments like this that I really did wonder to what extent she was self-aware about some of the stuff she said and secretly messing with people. There had to be some of that for certain. But just how far did it go? Let's test this idea, I said, switching to my serious devil advocate's voice. Say you have someone who is an amazing arcanist or scholar, one of the best in the world, and for their whole life, they've been producing innovations that have done tremendous good for humanity in a way that's objectively quantifiable and not controversial. Them being around observably makes the world a better place. Okay, she said, nodding. Now, that person lives for 1,000 years, and sure enough, their day comes up. Would you kill them to more than likely make room for someone merely average, just to reduce a tiny bit of strain on the world's resources? I could see that I delivered an intellectual hammer blow with this argument. Her face contorted, her lips curling downward as she recalibrated her perspective. That's a good point. I guess it wouldn't be right to do that. She thought for a few moments, and then her eyes brightened, an idea coming to her. What if we had a rating system? A rating system? Yeah, she said, nodding. For people. So, every time you did something really good, you get some points. And every time you did something really bad, you'd lose some points. And those points would determine how many years you get in total. That way, the really good people could stick around doing good forever, and the bad people dying sooner would make up for it. Tolma. You have such fantastic ideas. Why don't you run the world? Wow, I said, my eyes widening. That's, You ever thought about writing dystopian fiction, Tolma? Rin asked, impassively. I cracked up a bit, snorted, and giggled for a few moments. Hey, quit ganging up on me, she protested, frowning. I'm not gonna answer questions if you're just gonna treat me like I'm an idiot. Sorry, Tolma, I said, calming myself down. I'm not trying to be mean. It does, sound kind of a dreadful idea, though. It's not like I'm an expert, she said, looking at me with a dejected expression. I became a healer because I want to help people, and I do. But this big stuff kind of goes over my head. I didn't even want to go to this conclave thing when they told us all about it. That's fair, I said. Besides, she said, it'd still be better than nature, right? Than how people die at the moment. That's just totally random. Yeah, I said, and after thinking about it for a few moments, admitted more sincerely. I suppose it would. We walked for a few more minutes before we arrived. The coordinator's office was actually really close to the academy. As the crow flies, you could actually see the structure and protrusion on the hillside on which it was built almost directly overhead. However, because of the awkwardness of the terrain and the dreadful, ancient street planning that dominated city center, you had to go around the long way. Well, I say that. But you could levitate down with power, obviously. But they'd fine you for that if it was an emergency. The building itself was much like the others in the area. A thin, 3-story residential property, constructed largely of light-colored stone with a blue-tiled roof, compressed tightly alongside many others. Nothing marked it as an office, and indeed, only the first floor was an office. The second floor was where the coordinator lived, expecting some weekends and when the academy was closed. And the third was the private lodging he rented out to some students. The academy had no dormitories. The neighborhood had already been too densely packed when they built it about a century ago. So most of the full-time students who didn't have residence elsewhere in the city lived in this area, their accommodations offered as a part of a support program. None of the three of us here used it, though. Me and Tolma because we're a boogie snobs who didn't need it, and Rin preferred to save herself debt and just take a longer trip. She'd always been an early riser. I muttered the words to terminate the shielding effect as we stepped up to the door and then knocked on the metallic handle. I really hope this is quick, Rand said quietly. We need to be back up the academy and setting off in less than an hour. You didn't make it sound like it'd be too bad, Toma said. We'll see, she replied skeptically. We waited for a few moments, and then the door creaked open. However, the person who answered was not who I expected. Standing in the doorway was a tall, wide-shouldered man with a lean figure. He had a dark brown complexion and kinky black hair that was somewhat messy and unkempt, having grown to about his years without much in the way of human intervention. He had strong features, a tall face, and was dressed in a white tunic and dark blue long skirt with an intricate design at the hem, with a scepter strapped to his belt. Wearing it so openly was a bit of a taboo breach. But then, for him, it was pretty tame. As soon as he saw us, he smirked. Hehe, what's this? Who could these three girls with such impeccable fashion sense be, I wonder? Don't be weird, Seth, Tolma complained, pulling her veil down. Ren and I followed her cue, doing the same. Come on, I'm just messing around, he said. The old man said he'd be showing up, so I figured I'd save him the trouble of getting up and let you in. What are you even doing here, she asked, as she stepped into the hallway. I followed. The office was a very cramped environment. Lots of shelves packed with documents, files, and tomes of all sorts. And with less lighting than was ideal, it created a somewhat claustrophobic atmosphere. Guy asked me to come in and fill in some blanks in my files, he explained, his tone friendly. Guess I'm such a screw-up the archivist can't even be bothered to keep my paperwork straight, huh? I bet you messed something up when you filed them in to begin with, Tolma said. You're cold, Emma, he said with a chuckle, then turned in our direction. Nice to meet you, Ran, Sue. You're both looking nice for our big day. There was some amount of sarcasm in those last two words. Thanks, I said, brushing some hair out of my eyes. This guy was another person from our class, if you hadn't guessed as much already. His name was Seth of Ikaret. Of all my classmates, other than the top two, I probably knew him the least. Like Tolma, we were kind of polar opposites in terms of demeanor and interests. Except Tolma was a girl, so we at least had something in common. So honestly, I don't have all that much to say about him. He was a hard person to pin down. Kind of both a class leader type and a class clown at the same time. Though he often clashed with Cam for the former role. She aggressively disliked him. Incidentally, would often only refer to him with phrases like that oafish idiot or that relentless pain in my ass when he wasn't around. One trait of his that I did dislike was that he would often praise people for their looks, which was the one kind of compliment I didn't especially care for. He was one of the two biomancers in the class, the most conventional of the healing disciplines. The term biomancy is essentially self-explanatory, but like any style of arcana that gets popular, it had splintered into numerous schools. I'll explain in more detail when I can compare him directly to the other biomancer in our class, but the short version is that his school was the less gross one. Where's the coordinator? Rana asked, also unimpressed by the compliment. Down here, Miss Hoatrin, came a cool, elderly voice from several doors down. Seth grinned. Guess that answers that, huh? We headed down the corridor to the room I knew from past experience was the study/archive/mountain of books in which the coordinator usually resided. Rand knocked, despite the fact there was probably no point. She wasn't the type to take chances when it came to authority figures. Come, he said. We stepped into the chamber. Describing the office is a bit difficult, because I'm not quite sure whether the word organized or disorganized is, strictly speaking, more appropriate. Nothing was out of place, per se, but when you reach a particular singularity of sheer stuff in a given room, it becomes impossible to think of it as wholly tidy. The whole house was filled with books, but here it was everywhere. Tomes filled the shelves, and then the floors beside those shelves. Chests upon chests of paperwork were piled high in all corners, and the smell of dust and parchment was overbearing. And parchment isn't even supposed to smell of anything. At the back end, as desk by the window side, was class coordinator Nindar of Inadu, now turning to face us in his heavy leather seat. He was a short, Isaran man with typically light brown skin, with slumped shoulders, a bald head, and a visibly aged, weathered face, pointed and sharp. He was dressed in black robes. "Miss Reeds," he said, looking at Tolma, "thank you for your assistance." "No problem, sir," she replied, looking pleased with herself. "However," he continued, his tone inquisitive, I will not send you away. I'm not sure why I have the pleasure of your company for a second time." Tolma blinked for a moment. Oh, she said. "I didn't have to come back here, did I? I could have just delivered the message and, gone off to do whatever." "That was implied, I thought," he said, with a very slight smile. "Oh, geez, now I feel kind of dumb," she scratched at the back of her head. "I guess I ought to just leave, huh?" "Hey, Tolma," Seth said, looking at her. "I'm basically done here, too. You want to leave these two to do whatever they're doing and go grab something quick to eat? Then we can head straight to our meetup points after that." Tolma snorted, crossing her arms. "Why do I want to eat lunch with a creepo like you, huh?" "Creepo," he said, with a smirk. "Your attacks become cooler and more historic by the day, my lady. I'm gonna make your face historic," she warned. "You don't stop calling me weird stuff like my lady, creepo," he snorted, breaking out into soft laughter. Despite how the dynamic might come across to you, Tolma and Seth were actually pretty close friends, so far as I could tell. They spent time together, often for one reason or another, both for reasons related to the academy and not. I sometimes suspected that they could be dating, though every time it started to seem likely, something would happen or there'd be a piece of evidence that completely contradicted the idea. Though I wasn't very good at picking up that kind of thing regardless, so take it with a grain of salt. "Fine," she said, rolling her eyes. "I guess I could eat a bit." "Great," Seth said, perking up. He looked over to the coordinator. "This is alright, isn't it, Professor?" "Yes, it's fine," he said, starting to look a little impatient with the goofing around. "Go." "Alright, let's go, Patoma." Yeah, she turned to us. "See you in a couple hours, guys." "See you," I said. "Bye," Rand said, more bluntly. After the two of them left back out the door, I noticed that for some reason, she seemed a little dejected, looking towards the ground. However, Nindar left a little time for me to say something to her, speaking up almost as soon as the thump of the front door closing ran down the hallway. "I apologize for summoning you both here at the 11th hour, so to speak. I understand that it's probably quite inconvenient, and was due to my own negligence in not getting matters in order sooner." I was surprised. It was rare to hear a personally invested remark from the coordinator at all, let alone an apology. It's fine," I said. Rand said nothing at all. Something odd was definitely going on. I looked at her, and her face was tense, and a little worried. "If you don't mind, I'd like to speak with both of you privately. It should not take long. No more than a few minutes each." He turned towards me. His motions were, as always, stiff, almost mechanical after a fashion. "Miss Fusai, the matter I wanted to discuss with you is more pressing, though I think it would be better if you were to go first." I furrowed my brow, puzzled. "What's going on, Professor?" "Rand," he said, turning to her for a moment. "In the front room, at the table next to the fireplace, I have your personal files. While I'm speaking with Miss Fusai, I'd like you to review them quickly and make sure that everything is correct." There was something odd in his tone, something suggestive, almost. "Yes, sir." She lowered her head for a moment and stepped out of the room. I glanced at her and saw, for just a moment, a troubled, tired look on her face. I furrowed my brow, worried. "Have a seat, Miss Fusai," he said, extending a hand to a wooden chair adjacent to his desk. Sure." I headed over to it, then lowered myself down to the seat. Nindar regarded me with a firm, unflinching look. "You're probably wondering what the title of class coordinator, which isn't exactly normal, compared to something like teacher or professor. Though, as you've already seen, he was a professor and we did sometimes use the title. But that wasn't his role when it came to our group. Because we're all prodigies, supposedly among the best in the world for our age, and already deep into adult level in terms of skill if not qualification, we didn't need someone in an educator role to manage our class. But we still required someone who would administer our affairs, lessons, testings, and the timing and nature of our projects. Nindar, a veteran member of the staff, had been appointed to that role when the class had been created a couple of decades ago. He'd managed all 5 groups of exemplary disciples that had preceded ours. And he filled the role well. Almost harrowingly well. He was never late, he seemingly never made errors in our assignments, and was capable of pulling strings in the academy for our projects expertly. He'd arranged for me to have access to tomes of arcana that most students would likely never see on multiple occasions. Not that I knew anything about him as a person. These were just the facts. He also held the de facto position of Academy Archivist, one he'd possessed even before the reopening following the bombing. He'd supposedly been in the position for literal centuries, being among the eldest of the staff, and perhaps the eldest continually serving. Up close, with my glasses off, I could see how old he really looked. The hard lines and markings on his face, the sagging under his bloodshot eyes. It was a rare sight in the modern age. I hesitated, smiling awkwardly. All of this is making me kind of nervous, sir. He looked at me for a few more moments. Then he sighed, allowing the tension to leave him somewhat. My apologies, he said. It is not my intention to intimidate you, Utsushikome. It's alright, I said. The stress of the day is getting to me, I fear. Not 4 hours ago, I was tearing myself apart with worry that something would go amiss with the presentation. I made an attempt at a reassuring smile. I thought it went fine, sir. More or less, he conceded, nodding. Mercifully. But yes, 2 hours ago, I learned of something pertaining to your trip to the conclave. I believed it was important for you to know before you set off. Pertaining to me? Pertaining to you, he said, and to your grandfather. Ooh, interesting. There's something going on with Utsushikome's family history, I can tell. My throat's kind of starting to give up on me. I did a lot of reading yesterday with Up the Devil. I think this might have to be a short one today. I would love to read another chapter, but I could feel my throat just giving up on me. And I think I think I gotta go easy on myself. Sorry. Short reading day. It still says Up the Devil there. That's it. I'll fix it the last second. Watch this. This will only be accurate for like 5 seconds, but it's okay. But yeah. Thank you for joining me for a little Web Serial Wednesday. I'm hoping next week we could try being a new one. I like instead of just staying on one thing, like jumping between news stories, you know. I should start taking suggestions. I think that'd be cool. I might set up a suggestion box, honestly, if people have like stories they want me to read through, because I like reading through people's stories. It's very fun. But yeah, I'll think about it. I think that might help me instead of just like trying to find other people's stuff, because I don't want to just read whatever's popular, you know. I want to find the stuff hidden in the corners of the internet. And I will do that. You'll see. But yeah, that'll be the end of Web Serial Wednesday today. And Saturday, I wanted to play an RPG Maker game. And then next week, we'll see. I don't really have plans for next week. I will have plans, though, by the time it rolls around. But yeah, I hope everyone has a good Wednesday. I need to rest my throat and rest in general. Goodbye.